So in this video, we're going to be talking about two things: the annexation of Texas into the U.S. and the Mexican War. So if we'll remember, the Republic of Texas only lasted 9 years, 1836 to 1845, and in the beginning, right, we looked at this earlier in a previous video, but in the beginning, 1836, that is, in the beginning of the Republic of Texas, a lot of people in Texas wanted to become a state, right? So they petitioned the U.S. to become a state, and that was denied, 1836, 1837. But it was accepted, annexation was accepted in 1845. So why? What happened? That's our question. That's what we need to know for your exam, okay? But to know that, to answer that question, we have to look at the history of the U.S., okay? We have to look at the context in the U.S. What's going on in the U.S. at the time? You know, how did conditions change? What conditions changed? Now, to do that, let's start back in 1820. Let's draw our timeline to 1861. Okay. If you'll remember, in the video in the U.S. history section, we looked at a bunch of events. We had a big chart up here on the board, and it was events that led up to the Civil War. Okay, and one of the issues was the balance of power in the U.S. between free states and slave states. Right, one of the issues, one of the big issues, probably the biggest issue. Okay, free states and slave states. 1820, that was the Great Compromise. Right, then we had another compromise here. About 1850, compromise of 1850, and these compromises, you know, we traced it all the way back to the writing of the Constitution. Okay, so this problem of power in the Senate, in Washington here, between free states and slave states started way back in the writing of the Constitution, and it lasted all the way till the Civil War, until that got taken care of. Well, 1820. That was the Great Compromise. Part of it had to do with allowing free states and slave states coming in, how they're going to come in, right? So in 1836, Texas was going to come in as a slave state, right? Texas was a slave-holding state. It was going to come in as a slave-holding state, and there were no other free states to come in at the time. Now, it's not as if the states came in pairs. It's not like they were 2 by 2 or anything. Exactly, one free, one slave at the same time. It's not exactly the way it worked, but it's kind of the way it worked. Okay? Just know that it's kind of the way it worked. So the conditions weren't right in 1836 for Texas to join the Union as a slave state. But in 1845, they were right. Okay? Now, Texas came in 1845. Iowa, you know, it's Iowa here, came in 1848, and Wisconsin came in about 1846, 1847. So there was, in Texas was 1845, so there were other states, free states, that could come into the Union to help balance power in the Senate. All right? So that's the issue, okay? Well, that's one of the issues. That's probably the big issue, right? So two problems. One was it going to be a slave state or a free state? And in 1836, it couldn't come in as a slave state because it would shift the balance of power to the slave states, and senators in Washington weren't going to have that, at least not the ones from the free states. But in 1845, there were other states that could come in the Union around the same time as Texas, right? A couple years later. But that was still part of the deal, okay? So it could, in the long run, well, kind of, until you get to here, help to maintain the balance of power in the Senate, okay? So that was one issue. The balance of power in the Senate, it changed, all right? 1845 would have come in. The other issue was war with Mexico. So in 1836, they did not want the U.S. Mexico did not want, 1836 or 1845, Mexico did not want Texas to join the U.S., right? It was bad enough that Texas was independent. It was going to be worse if Texas was part of the U.S., okay? There's just more power for the U.S., right? The U.S. is gobbling up all of this territory, well, not this territory yet, but territory up here. Okay, and people in the U.S., some of them anyway, wanted to avoid war with Mexico. They were worried that the war was going to happen. And war did happen, okay, which is our second issue, okay, the Mexican War. So annexation is just those two issues, all right? Those were the two big issues that you should remember. The timing wasn't right in 1836. It was right in 1845 for Texas to come in as a slaveholding state. And people wanted to avoid, at least in 1836, to avoid war with Mexico. In 1845, people didn't quite care so much. Not everybody, but there wasn't quite the hesitation avoiding war, right? So the Mexican War happened right after Texas joined the Union, okay? And that was the Mexican War. It's 1846 to 1848, okay? Short war, all right? Short war. And there were a couple of issues, all right? One was the border between Texas and Mexico, right? So the border, as it is now here, it's at the Rio Grande, right? Well, Mexico said it was at the Nueces, and the Nueces is right here at Corpus. So I want to draw it about right there. So maybe you'll see that. See this line here? So this space, the Rio Grande Valley, was what's called now anyway, and it wasn't called that back then. And this area in the middle, this was contested, okay? So it was thought that Texas was kind of like this to Mexico, and the U.S. and Texas said, no, 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 the border's down here at the Rio Grande. So where was the location of the border? That was one big issue, all right? And the other issue was California. So this area, California, kind of this area, right? If you can see that, the U.S. offered to buy that for $30 million, right? $30 million the U.S. offered to buy this area from Mexico, right? This was Mexican territory. There's a lot of missions and little settlements throughout here, California especially. Well, Mexico said no. Mexico said they weren't interested in selling. Well, U.S. went to war, right? And it was a land grab. It was a land grab by the U.S., okay? So it took a couple of years, and what was the outcome? We don't need to get into the details of the Mexican War. You're not going to be asked about the details, chances are, about the Mexican War. Most of the fighting was down in Mexico, okay? U.S. Army troops entered and captured Mexico City eventually, right? There was some fighting over here and throughout here. A lot of fighting down here, 2 years. On the training actually for soldiers who would soon be in the Civil War, okay? Actually, it's just an aside. Anyway, end of the war, the border between Texas and Mexico, the U.S. actually, was set at the Rio Grande, and the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million for this area, okay? So they offered $30 million. They paid, that's for California, paid $15 million. Okay, that's called Mexican Cession. Mexican Cession is what it's called. Mexican Cession. So it's the cession. That's what Mexico had to cede as terms of the treaty after the war. Okay, so those are the big issues. Not much to it really in terms of your test, what you're going to need to know about annexation and the Mexican War.